Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Economic and environmental forces are driving record-breaking beef prices in the U.S. Joining us today to talk about that and other market factors is Andrew Coppin, cattle expert and CEO and founder of Ranchbot. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for joining us here today.
Great to be here, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
For those of you that are tuning in, thank you for being here as well. If you have any questions for Andrew, feel free to post those there in the chat area on your screen. If you're joining us from social media, simply post your questions directly in those channels. So, Andrew, you work directly with cattle producers across the country and have a unique perspective on how ranchers, most of them who would be small to family-run herds, how they're navigating high input costs, limited water access, and weather extremes. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing out there in the market at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think I've done 100,000 miles on the road across the US over the last 12 months and met with many hundreds of ranchers. I think there's some interesting dynamics going on in the market at the moment. Obviously, the cattle herd is at a historical low. I mean, we're back at sort of 1950s, 1960s levels for the herd, and a lot of ranchers haven't even begun the process of sort of rebuilding. Of course, we got down to those lower numbers due to sort of years of drought and challenged environments for increasing herds, and we've now got increasing input costs, and whilst prices are very high, demand on the product is still very high. I mean, there's no question beef is still the preferred protein across the US consumers. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword at the moment. Ranchers benefiting from high prices, but also benefiting from high input costs. And, it's hard to see those factors changing anytime soon.
So let's get out that crystal ball. What kind of structure? I mean, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of things happening out there. Do you see any structural changes ahead for the beef cattle industry? Are there going to be, smaller ranchers that may be exiting the market? And if so, what's going to replace them? Do you see any of those kind of modifications ahead?
I know there's a lot of talk about, smaller ranchers being sidelined. I think, that's going to be a choice for each operator. There's no question, that the operating costs of ranching are increasing. And so I think we're going to need to see, ranchers using technology and other things to run more efficient and effective operations. Because doing it how we've sort of done it in the past, may not allow you to remain competitive in a market where, there is new technology that allows people to run a more productive and more profitable operation. Obviously, at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, the cattle prices are high, but it's just most ranchers don't own as many cattle as they would like. No surprise there when the price is so high. But obviously, amidst, economic inflationary cost increases, labour is hard to find. The cost of running the F-250 isn't getting any cheaper. And ranchers still spending a lot of time driving around checking things that 95% of the time don't need checking. So in our work, we're sort of seeing more and more adoption. I think we've got about 10,000 ranchers on our platform of new technology that is allowing those smaller operators to stay really competitive and run the ranch with fewer people. So I think I'm not sure that is that trend's going to be driven specifically by just the market dynamic. It's more a choice and do what people want to change, as every sector on the planet has had to do. Price-wise and things, I don't know. It's hard to see. I mean, the US consumers love a fare with beef products. I'm one of them. We're not going to readily change our habits. I guess it would take some sort of consumer inflationary shock to really change the amount of beef consumption. You got to remember, even though the herd's back at the levels that it was in the 1950s, 60s, the population, we're now talking, we're 180 million people back then, and we're 340 million people now. So So when you think the average person's consuming 58 to 60 pounds of beef products a year, we've got to generate a lot of beef, and that dynamic is not going to change.
And that, like you mentioned, automation or things that can make it a little easier and give a better ROI is always important. So looking towards this fall, we talked about the higher beef prices. What do you see those meaning for inflation, for the supply chain overall?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, obviously in the last few months, we've had the added challenge of negotiating the closed Mexican border with the screwworm concerns, which obviously I don't think there'd be too many ranchers that wouldn't advocate that that's the right decision to shut the border to protect the greater good of the industry. But under that environment, of course, that's less cattle coming in, where 25% of grazing lands are still under a drought conditions at the moment, despite some pretty volatile weather, including the obviously tragic recent floods in Texas and in New Mexico. So we've still got, we're in the middle of summer, there's heat waves coming. It looks pretty challenging. It's very, very hard to see any sort of price depreciation in the short to medium term. As I said, the only real factor there could be, if inflation continues and the consumers back off a little bit on their desire to consume beef products. But there's really no sign of that as we head into the latter half of the summer.
Yeah, we had a guest on here recently. He put it well. He said, you don't take a date out for chicken. Meaning that steak still has its place, right? No, there's been some talk of drought going into this fall. Our meteorologist says that it could be very well timed for the crop harvest because it'll be dry and easy to get the crops out of the field. But when you're a cattle rancher, there's no ideal time for a drought. So what do you see in your crystal ball there? And if there is these dry conditions, are there any recommendations that you would have to help cattle producers better manage through those conditions?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, my lived experience for the last 10 years operating in Australia with large cattle ranchers, and now for the last 2 years I've been living here in Texas and working with US cattle ranchers, is, weather volatility is sort of here to stay. We're getting wetter wet and hotter hot, and we can have, both things happen in very short periods of time. So ranchers are having to be more nimble in their management of their herds, more responsive to the conditions they find themselves in. There's no real set and forget program for ranchers that are raising cattle. I mean, you need feed, you need pasture. If you've got to buy feed in, that's expensive. And if you've got to truck water in, that's very expensive. So I think we're sort of heading into a world where we need to better manage the available resources we've got, and the work that we're doing with ranchers to help them really quantify the amount of water, the amount of pasture, exactly where things are at on their properties at any given time, and provide them with real-time alerts and messaging, is allowing them to be more responsive to those things and the environment that they find themselves in. So I think, we've seen that trend evolve in the Southern Hemisphere. I think it's really catching on here in the US and in Canada, and allowing for ranchers to be more competitive despite the challenging times of weather and price.
Anything else that the cattle industry here in the US needs to think about to stay competitive?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any argument that the US beef producers are amongst the very, very best in the world and producing an amazing product. And, with 340 million mouths to feed, the challenge of the next decade is going to be, how do we produce more with the available time, available resources that we've got? And we only have so many, pastures. We only have so much water. But yet the population is going to continue to boom, and we're going to need to produce more and more beef. We've spent a lot of money, billions of dollars building a better cow. We're getting a lot more production out of less cattle. But as the population grows and demand for beef as a premium product also grows, there's no question producers are going to need to be more and more efficient, really optimize their resources. And I think, again, like every sector on the planet that has used better technology to achieve those outcomes, ranching is going to have to get on board and use technology to help them achieve those goals. The good news for ranchers is there's a lot of really great technology out there now that is well proven. It's no longer early stage things. We've got virtual fencing, we've got remote control of water, pumps, tanks, pipes. We've got geotagging of cattle and weighing in the pastures, and now there's a whole wave of AI camera technology coming that's also going to help ranchers be more efficient. So I'm really excited about what the industry future looks like, but ranchers are going to have to really think hard about using more technology and deploying better things if they want to remain competitive in the marketplace.
How best for them to evaluate that technology and to see if it's right for their operation?
Yeah, well, I think ranchers' best source of information is from their cattlemen's associations, events and things where they can get off the ranch and sort of work on the business, not in it. I've never met a rancher with time on their hands. I've never met a rancher with a bottom on the to-do list. But, they must spend some time and go and learn and educate and get informed about what else is happening. And, of course, the most trusted source of additional information is their neighbours, other ranchers, talking amongst each other themselves to see, what are you doing that's helping you run a better operation, and what are the things that are getting real traction. I think that's the best, probably the two most valuable sources of information that they can get. And obviously there's also a lot of great work being done by US universities and colleges about, how they can run a more efficient and productive business. So I don't think there's a shortage of opportunities to be further educated, to continue to think about how to run a better business, and to talk to your friends and neighbours about things that they're doing that are working is probably the single best path.
It's been a great discussion. Any final thoughts or key takeaways to leave our audience with here today?
No, I think it's been great chatting with you, Sarah. I mean, again, the outlook for the beef industry in the US is super positive. Obviously, there are some short-term challenges and the costs of things for all people across the country, not just the beef industry, have been trending up. Obviously, everyone would like to see that curtailed, but super excited about where the industry is going. There's so many great producers here with huge opportunities to continue to build out their businesses. And, I think ag tech technology for them is really going to be a super boost to their productivity and profitability. So, I'm looking forward to the next few years here with the US beef industry.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Andrew Coppin of Ranchbot. We also appreciate all of you tuning in as well. Until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.